Hi, I'm Kathleen Carlson. Welcome to my channel where we discuss sacred sounds and symbols. Today I'd like to talk about yantras and specifically the Hanuman Yantra. So Hanuman is a god in the Eastern tradition, often referred to as the monkey god because he has a monkey face and he has monkey features, but he is very human-like in terms of intelligence and in terms of his important role in many of the Hindu traditions and stories. Yantras are used for spiritual protection. They're used to accelerate spiritual development. And what we'll do is break down all the different aspects of the Hanuman Yantra. This is a very unique yantra because inside of the gates and the circles and the things that are very typical of yantras are Sanskrit letters that are Hanuman's mantras, one of Hanuman's mantras. So it's a little unusual. There are yantras that have either Sanskrit letters, the figures, or that have numbers in them, and this happens to be one of those. Hanuman is the hero of stories and epics in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Hanuman is one of the vanara, which is a race of forest-dwelling beings, and he is also the ardent devotee of Lord Rama. Hanuman is the patron of martial arts, of wrestling, of acrobatics. He is also the patron of meditation and scholarship, so he combines intelligence with very intense physical power and physical strength. Some interpretations of the name Hanuman break it down to Han, which means pride, and Mana, which means destroyed, or the one whose pride was destroyed. So his pride is destroyed because he has all kinds of superpowers, and yet he becomes the servant, in effect, the right-hand man, the absolute central key for Rama that he's devoted to in many of the stories of Ramayana and the rescue of Sita, who is Rama's wife and consort. And he plays a very central role, and yet he is sort of always the second man. He's not, he's not the central character. There are many stories of Hanuman's bravery and loyalty, as well as all of his superpowers. So I'm going to read you the list of superpowers because they are extensive and I want to make sure that I get them right. He cannot be killed by any weapon in war. He has the power to induce fear in his enemies, and he has the power to destroy fear in his friends. He cannot be harmed by the Vajra weapon, which is lightning. He cannot be drowned, so he has protection from water. He cannot be harmed by fire. He is not attracted to women, which I think is a very interesting superpower, which I guess would leave you free in many situations and help to avoid any temptation. He can make himself as small as he wants and also as large as he wants. He cannot be killed, so he has longevity and immortal life. And he will always be happy and content, which I think is absolutely the greatest superpower. Now that you know a little bit about Hanuman, let's talk about the benefits of using the Hanuman Yantra. On the physical level, this yantra is known for supporting the immune system and unfailing energy as exhibited by Hanuman. On the mental level, focusing on the Hanuman Yantra increases your mental skills and your communication skills. Hanuman is often appealed to in seemingly impossible circumstances. So sort of like the Catholic saints that are, the saint of lost causes, so that would be Hanuman. Thus, Hanuman and his yantra are associated with strength of both mind and body. So this allows you to overcome hurdles in your life. The energy carried by Hanuman encourages clear thinking and straightforward communication. A combination of mantras to Hanuman and a focus on his yantra will help to overcome difficult circumstances by centering the heart. Hanuman is known for a great heart, especially due to his devotion to Lord Rama. On the astrological level, some say that Hanuman is very beneficial to defend against the malefic influences of Saturn. In other words, if you have challenges with the planet Saturn, then the mantras to Hanuman would be very effective. Saturn is the bearer of karma, which can bring both good and negative influences into your life as the Saturn return, which is a certain astrological cycle. So Saturn is bringing that back. So Saturn is like the teacher, the karmic teacher in life. And you can ease those influences if there's any negative karma or you have any decisions that you made in this life or another life that are coming back to you, then you can mitigate those with the Hanuman Yantra and with mantras to Hanuman. Other sources say the same thing about an ill-placed Mars in your astrology. So Mars is associated with war, with anger, but it can also be the energy that is needed for accomplishment in life. So to channel that Mars and to harness that energy helps in both physical pursuits, material pursuits, as well as spiritual pursuits. So bringing in the Hanuman Yantra and the mantras to Hanuman will help to get the positive aspects of what can often be a challenging astrological configuration. Examples of mantras for both Mars and Saturn can be found in my planetary mantras playlist. Now that we have a sense of Hanuman and his influence, let's take a look at the yantra. So he has the 4 gates, which are representing the 4 cardinal directions and are very common in mantras, as I mentioned earlier. A square symbolizes the foundation of the material world. And of course, the number 4. It also correlates to the earth element in the Vedic tradition. So in the 5-element system, the square represents earth. So this is a very grounding yantra and a very grounding influence. On each side of the yantra are the gates that I mentioned that are a passageway between the spiritual world and the material world. So the gates are a form of protection for the inner aspect. In other words, you're going from the outside to the inside. So the closer you get to the inside is the inner realm of the individual, which you are trying to protect. So the gates are also helping to protect that from negative forces or disintegration forces. Inside of those gates is a circle with 8 lotus petals. So the circle is representing Akasha, or the ether element, so the element that holds everything else. That's the circle, and the circle is holding those 8 petals. Now each of those petals are certain virtues that must be exemplified and certain negative tendencies that have to be overcome in order to keep moving into the very center of the circle. So the circle is representing the cycles of nature all the way from the atom to the universe. And that is the central quest of spirituality, is to experience the oneness of all of those realms. The inner ring of the 8 lotus petals can be represented by particular goddesses and also by particular cities. So the cities are superpowers. These are the powers that are spiritual powers to become greater, to become smaller, heavier, lighter, levitation, all those kinds of things. But the important thing really is the self-development. So attaining the city is not the goal. The goal is to exemplify the positive characteristics of each of those lotus petals, to master whatever negative might be associated with that particular petal or that particular idea. And once you accomplish those things, the spiritual powers may come naturally. There are practices where you can, focus on developing them, your psychic abilities, that kind of thing. But the real path, the real spiritual path, is the character development and the development of all of those virtues. So we'll go through each of those virtues now. The first one is enema. So this word means smallness or vulnerability. The city or power conveyed is the ability to make oneself microscopically small. The next petal and the next superpower is lagima. So this is the ability to make oneself super light and to levitate. So this is reducing your weight so that you can fly. And I've read very interesting stories about the ability of monks high in the Himalayas to create a running style where they're like half flying and half running. So there's records of this from people who have visited, way back, all the way back to the Second World War. And whether they're true or not, they're stories, they're anecdotes. We certainly don't have videos. We don't have anyone that's demonstrating these things here in the Western world. But that is the idea, that instead of leaping whatever a normal human would, 6 feet, 10 feet forward, they can leap 30 feet or 100 feet. And then they can cross over big chasms and valleys in the mountains and get to the next village or get to another place very quickly. The next petal and the next city is garima. This means heaviness or grounding. So this is the ability to make yourself as heavy as possible. In other words, to make yourself like a mountain, like you are immovable. And that can be very useful in, I suppose, a variety of situations. The next petal is mahima, and this is the ability to expand oneself infinitely, so to make oneself as large as the universe, just to keep expanding out into the galaxies out into space. So that's Mahima. Then Istava. This is godliness and purity. This is the absolute mastery over the material universe and all natural forces. Then the 7th one is Vasattva, and this is subjugation. So this is bringing forces under control. This is conquering the self, and also in turn having a will or an ability to bring all living things under your control. So was this the kind of thing where, what was there in the Bible where Jesus commanded the fig tree and the fig tree withered? Just the idea, of course, the waves, the ocean, the parting of the Red Sea, whatever. So in many traditions, there are examples of someone who has gained power over natural forces. And then the final one is prakamya. This is fulfilling the objective. This is the power of will and the complete mastery over natural law and over the elements. So you have mastery over creation. So you can see there's some overlap in some of these. Some are very distinct and other ones, but it's all about mastery. It's about mastering the internal world, and therefore you have mastery over the external world as well. So those were the 8 petals forming the lotus. And the lotus is associated with the heart. So as I mentioned earlier, Hanuman is associated with the heart. There was a time when he was challenged, show me your love for Lord Rama. And so he reached open and he pulled open his chest, and he showed within himself that Lord Rama and his consort Sita were embedded in his heart. So that's a very famous story, metaphorical or otherwise. But Hanuman is very closely associated with that mastery of the heart, with the purest form of devotion. Now we'll move inward from those flowers, the circle with the 8 lotus petals, and then into that mantra that I talked about in the center. So this mantra, we'll take a look at word for word. And the mantra is Om Hum Hanumate Rudra Makaya Hum Vat. So word by word translation, of course, Om is associated with the hum of the universe. It's like the quintessential mantra, a seed syllable that is like the sound of creation. And many mantras, of course, begin with Om, some end with Om, but in particular begin with Om. So that's the first word. Then the next word is Hum. So this is pronounced with a longer vowel, so it's not hum, it's Hum. And that is the fire of consciousness. So it's a word that is used to kindle the fire of consciousness. And this is an etheric fire that's more connected to lightning, pranic breath, and that level of energy versus a physical fire, versus a fire that would be fueled by wood. This lightning can also be used for spiritual protection. Hum is sometimes viewed as the syllable for divine or righteous wrath. So it's an intense form of protection and self-defense. Next is the Sanskrit word Hanumate, which is a reference to Hanuman's great physical stamina and strength. Then Rudrat Makaya, this is a reference to Hanuman and sometimes to Shiva. Rudra is red, so the one who is red. So it's that, that power, that passion, the desire. So that can be a cleansing force for the individual or a cleansing force in the universe. And it can also be a word that is removing fear and discomfort from the individual. So it's a very powerful word. The mantra that is in the center of this Hanuman Yantra is a very powerful mantra. And there's often warnings, to be careful using this mantra compared to softer mantras that might be to Saraswati, for example, or Parvati. But this is a very intense mantra. So just a word of warning there. And then the last 2 words, hum, so that is a type of vibrational weapon. Sometimes you'll read in some of the ancient Vedas that there are mantric weapons, and there's a lot of debate whether these were actually mantras or whether this was a poetic description of other types of weapons that might have been in use in ancient times, that a lot of the ancient civilizations or ancient aliens theories that they did indeed have weapons that we are now developing again. In any case, it is a very strong word, and it can be used to remove negativity. It's also connected to very fierce goddesses like Chandi or Kali. The final word, Phat, P-H-A-T, means without a doubt. In other words, I accept the power of the action of this mantra without a doubt. So you could think of it as an amen, but like a really strong amen, like amen, like I accept this. So as a whole, it's a very strong mantra that can shift situations very quickly. And as I said, be a little careful in the use of this one. So that is a quick tour of this simple but beautiful Hanuman Yantra and a little bit about Hanuman himself. I hope that you will use this. I do have a video that is this particular mantra, and I love the idea of Hanuman. The Hanuman Chalisa is a very long poem, I think 40 lines in Sanskrit that I have not yet learned, that is praising and telling the story of Hanuman. And that's sort of a goal, to learn that one eventually. For now, we've got this beautiful yantra, and we have the Hanuman Rudra mantra. Thanks again. Have a beautiful day. Namaste.